Hi! Hello! Mabuhay! How are you? What day is today? What did you feel? So, for today, we will discuss about the Philippine literature during the American period.
So good morning to each and everyone. So we are assigned for the topic of Philippine literature during the American period. So in this period, there are two significant developments in education and culture. The first one is the introduction of free public instruction for all children of school age. The second one is the use of English as a medium of instruction in all levels of education in public schools. So, Philippine literature in English, as a result of American colonization of the country, could escape the being imitative of American models of writing, especially during its period of apprenticeship. The poetry written by early poets manifested studied attempts at versification, as in the following poem, which is a proof of the poet's rather elementary exercises in English language. So I have here an example of a poem written by one of the Filipino poets here in the Philippines, who is Juan F. Salazar. So here is his poem written by him. Vacation days at last are here, and we have time for fun so dear. All boys and girls do gladly cheer this welcome season of the year. In early June in school we'll meet. A harder task shall we complete, and if we fail we must repeat that self-same task without retreat. We simply rest to come again to school where boys and girls obtain the Creator's gift to men whose sanguine hopes in us remain. Vacation means a time to play, for young and old in night and day. My wish for all is to be gay, and evil none lead you astray. So that is the poem written by Juan F. Salazar. So the poem was anthologized in the first collection of poetry in English, Filipino poetry, edited by Rodolfo Dato. So, the poets featured in this anthology were Proceso Sebastian Maximo Calao, Fernando Maramag, Leopoldo Yuchanco, Jose Ledesma, Vicente Callao, Santiago Sevilla, Bernard Garcia, Francisco Africa, Pablo Anzures, Carlos P. Romulo, Francisco Tonogbanwa, Juan Pastrana, Maria Agoncillo, Paz Marquez Benitez, and Luis Dato. So in fiction, the American period of apprenticeship in literary writing in English is marked by imitation of the style of storytelling and strict adherence to the craft of the short story as practiced by popular American fictionists. Early short story writers in English were often dubbed as the Andersons or Saroyans, or the Hemingways of Philippine letters. Leopoldo Yabes, in his study of the Philippine short story in English from 1925 to 1955, points to these models of American fiction exerting profound influence on the early writings of the story writers like Francisco Aracena, A.A. Lee, and Litiatko Paz Latorina. So that's it. So, when the University of the Philippines was founded in 1908, an elite group of writers in English began to exert influence among the culturati. So, Americans were helping Filipinos to inspire them to make poets. to become poets rather through literature or literary something that can help them improve their English language, since the English language in that time was used as a medium instructions in all public schools here in the Philippines. The University of the Philippine Writers Club, founded in 1926, had stated that one of its aims was to enhance and propagate the language of Shakespeare. So we do all know that Shakespeare was one of the famous writers known in the country or in the whole world. And then in 1925, Paz Marquez Benitez short story The Dead Stars that we already read. The Dead Stars, this somewhat kind of love story. The characters there are three, I think. Two girls and one boy. The boy fell in love with another girl, and when he knows that he had a wife, but at the end, he still chooses to stay with his wife. So The Dead Stars was published and was made the landmark of maturity of the Filipino writer in English. Soon after, Benitez, short story writers began publishing stories no longer imitative of American models. So when the time that Filipinos are become independent when it comes to writing,
the major novels of the period, such as The Filipino Rebel by Maximo Calao and His Native Soil by Juan C. Laya, are the discourses on cultural identity, nationhood, and being Filipino done in the English language. So this short story is written by a Filipino poets or a Filipino short story writers, but written in the English language. Brother Leon brought Home a Wife by Manuel Argilia scanned the scenery as well as the folkway of Ilocandia, while N.V.M. Gonzalez, or also known as Nestor Vicente Madali, novels and stories such as Children of Ash-Covered Loam present the panorama of Mindoro. So the novels and stories of Nestor Vicente Madali is present the panorama or the present the perspective of Mindoro. So his story is all about the perspectives of Mindoro, customs and traditions, while configuring its characters in a human dilemma of nostalgia and poverty. So about the poverty of such a place in his area. Apart from Argilia and Gonzalez, noted fictionists during the period included Francisco Arciliana, whom Jose Garcia Villa lauded as a genius storyteller. So, Jose Garcia Villa is a Filipino poet and a storyteller also. She is also a writer during this period. In this time, she also known as the genius storyteller because of his styles and techniques during his present or during he will present. Ayun niya sagot on. Jose Garcia Villa is also known as the genius storyteller or the genius storyteller, yes, because when he talk in front of many people, he has many techniques and strategies in telling stories that make his more famous in his time. Another fictionists also in these times or in this period are Francisco Arciliana, Consorcio Borge, Aida Rivera, Condrado Pedroche, Amador Daggio, Sinay Himada, Hernando Ocampo, Fernando Maria Guerrero, and Jose Garcia Villa himself wrote several short stories in this time, but she focuses more on the poetry. So in this time also, Jose Garcia Villa also wrote a short story, but she focuses more or she gave much time to the poetry, writing poems. In 1936, When the Philippine Writers League was organized, Filipino writers in English began discussing the value of literature in the society. So in this year, 1936, the writers of this period began to discuss and focuses the importance of literature in such society. Initiated and led by Salvador P. Lopez. So Salvador P. Lopez is a Filipino poet and writer. He is also an essayist. So whose essays on literature and society provoke debates. So the essays and the writers and all the writers of Salvador P. Lopez make way to debates. So his masterpieces are the reason why debates today are now existing. The discussion of these debates is centered on the proletarian literature. So proletarian literature is talks about the people who engages themselves in low class of literature and also those people who are committed to the literature. Art for art's sake, literary orientation. 1, 2, 3, go. With Salvador P. Lopez, the essay in English gained the upper hand in day-to-day discourse on politics and governance. So, because of Salvador P. Lopez, essays in English gained reward or such a value in this time because of its content and because of its information and its content to the worldwide view. Polemicists who used to write in Spanish like Claro M. Recto slowly started using English in the discussion of current events, even as newspaper dailies moved away from Spanish reporting into English. So, polemicists are those writers who used to write their pieces or content using the Spanish language. But in this time, these polemicists used to use English language instead of Spanish language. Among the essayists, Federico Mangajas had an essay facility with the language and the essay as genre. Other noted essayists during the period were Fernando Maramag, Carlos P. Romulo, Condrado Ramirez. During the American period, seditious plays using the form of the Salzuela were mounted. Sarswellistas Juan Abad, Aurelio Tolentino, Juan Matapang Cruz, Juan Crisostomo Soto mounted the classics like Tanikang Ginto, Kahapon Ngayon at Bukas, and Hindi Ako Patay, all directed against the American imperialists. So this plays were all directed by the American imperialists. Patricio Mariano's Anak ng Dagat and Severino Reyes' Walang Sugat are equally remarkable Zarzuelista staged during the period. So Zarzuela is a kind of play that is held in the stage. So, or in the other words, Zarzuela is a stage play. On the eve of World War II, Wilfredo Maria Guerriero would gain dominance in theater through his one-act plays, which he toured through his mobile theater. So, Wilfredo Maria Guerriero is also a stage play, she also play in the stage using Zarzuela, but in mobile app, using a mobile app. Thus, Wanted a Chaperone and The Forsaken House become very popular in campuses throughout the archipelago. The novel in Tagalog, Iloco, Hiligaynon, and Subuanon also developed during the period, aided largely by the steady publication of weekly magazine like Liwayway, Banawag, and Bisaya, which serialized the novels. Among the early Tagalog novelists of the 20th century were Ishmael Amado, Villirano, Hermando Pina, Faustino Aguilar, Lope K. Santos, and Lazano Francisco. Ishmael Amado's Bulalakaw ng Pag-asa, published in 1909, was one of the earliest novels that dealt with a theme of American imperialism in the Philippines. The novel, however, was not released from the printing press until 1916. At which time, the author, by his own admission and after having been sent as a pensionado to the U.S., had other ideas apart from those he wrote in the novel.
The next novelist is Valeriano Hernandez Pina. His novel is entitled Nena and Neneng. The story is all about the two women who happen to be best of friends as they cope with the relationships with the men in their lives. The next novelist is Faustino Aguilar. His novel is entitled Pinaglahuan. The story is all about a love triangle set in the early years of the century, where the workers' movement was being formed. The next novelist is Lupe K. Santos. His novel is entitled Banaag at Sikat. It has almost the same theme and motive as the hero of the novel, Delphine, also falls in love with a rich woman and a daughter of a wealthy landlord. The love story, of course, set also within the background of development of the workers' trade union, and throughout the novel, Santos was able to engage the readers in lengthy treatise and discourse on socialism and capitalism. Many other Tagalog novelists wrote on variations of the same theme, like interplay of faith, love, and justice. Among these writers are Inigo Ed Regalado, Roman Reyes, Faustino J. Galauran, Susana de Guzman, Rosario de Guzman Lingat, Lazaro Francisco, Hilaria Labog, Rosalia Aguinaldo, and Amado V. Hernandez.
Among the Ilocos writers, noted novelists were Leon P. Chay, who was also the region's poet laureate, then Hermogenes Belen, and Mina Pecson Crisologo, whose meaning Wenu Ayat Tikarwa is considered to be the Ilocos version of Nole Mitangharay. So, as you can see, Leon P. Chay, Hermogenes Belen, and Mina Pecson Crisologo are one of the most famous writers and novelists of Ilocos. In the Visayas, Magdalena Halandoni and Ramon Mozones would lead most writers in writing the novels that dwelt on the themes of love, courtship, life in the farmlands, and other social upheavals of the period. Marcel Navarra wrote stories and novels in Sugbuhanon. So, Magdalena Halandoni and Ramon Mozones and Marcel Navarra are one of the famous writers of Sugbuhanon or in Cebu.
In all languages, poetry continued to flourish all over the country, which is the Philippines, during the American period. So, Francisco Balagtasan is the nation's foremost poet, invented the Balagtasan. So, what is Balagtasan? So, Balagtasan is a debate in verse between protagonists debating pros and cons of an issue. The first Balagtasan was held in March 1924 at the Instituto de Mujeres with Jose Corazon de Jesus and Florentino Collantes as rivals. So because of the Balagtasan, Jose Corazon de Jesus was known as Huseng Batuti. So he is the first king of the Balagtasan and the finest master of genre, and followed by the Balagtastistas Emilio Mar Antonio, and Crescenciano Marquez. Husing Batude produced finest poems and lyrics during the period, debates with Amado Hernandez on the political issues between American and nationhood. During the American period, Lope K. Santos' writings are also a proof of how poets master in translating the languages effective in poetry. So the Balagtasan would be echoed as a poetic fiesta. In 1932, Alejandro Abadilla's poem Ako ang Daigdig began the era of modernism in Tagalog poetry, a departure from traditional rhymed, measured, and oral recited poems. There are many Tagalog poets during the American period, like Jose Corazon de Jesus, Benigno Ramos, Teodoro Agoncillo, and many more. Like the writers in English, Tagalog writers also formed an organization or Ilaw and Panitik. Benigno Ramos was one of the most politicized poets of the period, as he aligned himself with peasants of the Sakdal movement. Tagalog fiction, as well as other languages in the region, was developed alongside the novel. Most fictionists are also novelists, like Brigido Batumbakal and Macario Pineda. They chose to dwell in a changing rural landscape. Deogracias del Rosario, on the other hand, chose the city and considered as the father of modern short story in Tagalog. There are two women writers that are also became known during the period, Liwayway Arqueo and Genoveva Edroza Matote. They use light fiction, a kind of storytelling that uses language through poignant rendition. Their writings have been used as a models of fine writing in Filipino. The Ako'y Isang Tinig by Genoveva Matute and Uhaw ang Tigang na Lupa by Liwayway Arqueo. So about the author of the Philippine literature during American period, Lilia Quindoza Santiago is author behind Kagampanan at Iba Pang Tula and Ang Magagamot ng Salay-Salay. She was also known as Makata ng Taon because of her works. She also teaches Philippine literature in the University of the Philippines. And that's all for the Philippine literature during the American period.
Thank you so much for watching. We hope that you have learned something from this video. Bye!